Please do join me in welcoming all of our panel. Thank you so much for sending in the questions for the last Q&A, and please do send them on in. I can see we're coming. I have a bit of a delay on my phone, so do be patient. And as we have a panel, if you could also, if there's a specific person that you want to address your question to, do put that in the message that you send. Philip, I wonder if we could start with you. When you think back to your early days with Tapper and Mir, what would you say are some of the supply chain security differences that come to mind?
Hello. Okay. So I started with TAP about 23 years ago. It's kind of unusual. It was this man actually that hired me back in the day. But if I look back, what we heard it this morning, cybersecurity, constantly referred to throughout the conversations today. We weren't even talking about cybersecurity back at those meetings of TAP at 20 people in a room. We never talked about cybersecurity. It was mentioned earlier today as well. I picked up on something Thornton said, security and resiliency. Back in the day, we were all talking about physical security, hardening of trucks and supply chains. We weren't really talking about resiliency and all the different components that resiliency brings along with it. And I think even many organizations, certainly big organizations, have probably even restructured their security team that are now a security and resiliency team. I guess one of the biggest changes is security technology. When we think back, and at least when I think back to the early days, we had tracking devices that literally that's all they could do. It was a very rudimentary tracking device. Probably its price point was quite high. If we look at what's available today, and I was talking to a supplier outside about new products that they're bringing, if we look at what we've seen is the Internet of Things are bringing an array of products that didn't exist back then. We were probably limited back then, but nowadays we've got devices that can do multiple technologies in similar environments, and those technologies can talk to each other, which is giving us layers and layers of security around that truck, trailer, and high-value shipment. And I guess the other big one will be the complexity of the supply chains. For a manufacturer, most of our supply chains have changed over the years. The countries you're dealing with the different sources you're having your products coming through, the different modes of transport. If we think back to Adrian's slide earlier, and he showed how vast the DHL network is, that's for the Air Express. But then if you bring in containers and rail and road, that complex map just gets bigger and bigger. And I guess the last piece I would just say is, they're the things that have changed, but if we think about the one or two items that haven't changed, crime methods. I know crime is pretty much, there are new versions of crime, but they follow a similar pattern. I was talking to someone recently about a deception theft. For those who might remember, deception theft starting, I think when we were in Tapa in London, everybody was talking about it, this new method. It's still happening. It's 2025, and people are still being deceived into giving out high-value loads. And then the other aspect would be, I guess the most important piece is understanding your supply chain has not changed. You need to understand your supply chain. It was the same requirement then, and it is the same requirement now. You need to know all those touch points and understand the different aspects. To me, that's the biggest changes.
Thank you, Philip. And I'm going to just come to you, Mark, in a second. Torsten, thank you for joining us. In just one moment, I'm going to invite you to explain a bit more about why we have a bar on stage. I don't think it's general conference practice for most people. So, Mark, let me quickly follow up with you on what Philip was saying, though, a little bit more. What's your view on how supply chain security challenges have evolved over the years? And is there anything that's particularly keeping you up at night?
I think basically with your introduction that you gave, you covered all of the points that challenge us. But I would like to come back to one point that probably Torsten has been preaching now for decades, which is connecting the dots. And this is the issue that I see, because from supply chain security, you have security and you have the supply chain, right? So the organized criminals, they're becoming still more and more professional. They have more funding, allowing them to get even better. So this is not going to go away, right? But then on the other side, our supply chain colleagues in the company, so they have to find transit ways around war zones. They were hit by COVID, where they were sitting with our logistics suppliers every 3 days renegotiating container pricing and availability, right? We have earthquakes impacting the supply chain. So both of us, we have complete different challenges, and we are all maxed out at work, right? And so getting those interests back together, so coming back to COVID and the container shortage, getting into one of those quarterly business reviews or those every 3-day meetings that happened and coming with any security requirement is the wrong way to go, right? And this is, I think, where we have to find the link again. And maybe that's a growth opportunity for TAPA to bring those supply chain colleagues finally back into the room.
Well, let me come to TAPA as you're here on the stage. Go on, Torsten, share with us why you've got a beer open already as well. And I know you're going to keep an eye on the questions if there are any coming in as well.
Yeah, so it's very easy, okay? For the last couple of years, we always ask the audience to raise questions. And it's not always easy to get questions. You know, it's really like, guys, ask questions. You know, we have all the experts here. You know, this is your opportunity. But, and that's interesting, as soon as we leave the conference and we meet in the bar, you raise all your questions. So therefore, I thought, I bring the bar to you. So now, raise your questions. And if you don't want to raise it via the app, come to my bar. You know, give me the question, and I will raise the question for you. Otherwise, I will check the app, and I will give the questions. You know, but that's very important, okay? Please raise questions. This is your opportunity. And that's the reason why the TAPA bar is here.
Great, and I know, thank you, Torsten. I know you'll shout out if any questions come through that we can put to the panel. And I notice you've kept the beer over there for you, by the way, and not over here.
It's part of the bar, isn't it? No?
Jan, let me come to you now and ask, what new trends are you seeing coming through when it comes to MOs?
Yeah, I want to explain one example. It's about identity theft. Just to set it into the picture, we worked with group security, which are also here. We also work with our partners. A lot of them are also here, or at least TAPA members. But we have the practical challenge that we have to technically allow one-step subcontracting. This is to cover peaks. This is to counter flexibility issues, these kinds of stuff. And in this, I will call them second-tier suppliers. There we often have very, very transport-oriented, process-oriented guys, which basically is a good thing. But if they run into trouble, they tend to try to fix it by themselves. And then we run into the problem that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, to say it in English here, that they get scammed. And this ranges from, I'm surprised that it works, up to it's nearly perfect. So this is one of the MOs we watched a few times now. We're not sure if it really becomes a trend or not, but I wanted to share this example with you because it's always a problem if a second stage partner wants to do the right thing instead of saying he has a problem. And this is something we will have to address, we have to counter. This is one of the challenges we face in the future.
Thank you, Jan. Do we have any questions coming through?
Yeah, actually we have a first question to Jan. Okay, so what are the key areas does TAPA enhance vehicle transportation and storage security for vehicle manufacturers and vehicle transporters, please?
Can you repeat the first part of the question?
I can easily do that, Jan, no problem. So what key areas does TAPA enhance you as a car manufacturer, the vehicle transportation, and what is good for you from a storage point of view, especially from a vehicle to automotive point of view?
No, we run into a problem because I'm primarily a materials guy. So regarding car transports, it's not my field. It's not really my field of expertise. We run standards there. I know them, but I don't know them by heart. So I have to pass it, or I have to. Maybe we can get in contact, and we can answer the question afterwards.
That would be good. Let me come to you, Kieran, and then and we'll go back to the chat in a minute. How does Sony PlayStation effectively assess and mitigate risks associated with third-party suppliers to enhance supply chain security?
We do have a strategy, but it probably is going to sound very basic when I come out with it here. I know there are a lot of people here who are in the transportation and in the warehouse business, so our suppliers are mainly warehousing and transportation companies, so there's a huge range from which we can select. And when I talk about Sony PlayStation, I'm talking globally. The most fundamental thing before we even entertain anybody from a security perspective, in order for them to be even included in an RFP, is that they would have to have FSRA and TSR1. That's our absolute basic term in terms of our supplier vetting. And we have developed templates which actually score so that we have objective scoring in terms of how they perform, not just at the TSR and FSR, but even beyond that, so that we can actually assess them from a scoring point of view. But we also mitigate our suppliers by their ability to actually, on the transportation, being able to be monitored. So as part of our mitigation for risk, we use active monitoring as a very important part of how we mitigate risk in the supply chain. So every single container that comes out of China in a sea container has a monitor, is tracked, is actively monitored. And in America, every single FTL truck and LTL truck that is in the supply chain is monitored. So we actually, in some cases, we don't rely on our suppliers to monitor their goods, but we use monitoring.
I think there's a question that probably follows on quite nicely from that in the
Yeah, there are a lot of questions already, you know. So, but I think one of the questions is really to all of you, as a manufacturer, as a shipper, and the owner of the goods, how do you decide what kind of TSR level you want? When you want a TSR level?
Kieran, I'll come to you first.
Well, certainly, depending on the level of transportation, for an FTL, it has to be a TSR1 or a TSR1. And for a storage, in our main storage facilities, they have to be FSRA. Now, when you go to, hubs, they have to be at least FSRB, and when we go down into the network, we want them to already be at the FSRA level, but the standard gets quite diluted down in the network, which is really hard to monitor, but the main contractor has to be at the TSR1 level.
Would anyone else like to add to that? No? In which case, Mark, let me come to you. Can I ask, how did TAPA support you with and in your own supply chain security program?
So basically, to start off, first of all, the TAPA standard was the basis for our very first own supply chain security procedure. I think majority of our logistics providers, you're all here in the room, they're all TAPA members, so also for us it was the easiest to go down that route. I think from implementation perspective, we can still improve. We have sometimes our logistics partners telling us, hey, the value is so high, don't we want to increase the TSR level on that transportation? But this is again what I mentioned before with connecting the dots between supply chain people and our security department, right? The other thing, I think one of our most important factories down in Mexico City, which is the main provider to our largest market, which is no secret, the Americas or the US, we have certified that FSRA level. So, good.
Jan, let me come to you. When you have a broad range of risks and cargo values, what challenges do you face and how do you address these? And are there any particular situations where these challenges are more pronounced, for instance, in less than truckload or other situations?
Yeah, in the LTL network, we started working because we have fewer partners. It's basically the pattern is that every square meter in Europe is contracted by Volkswagen to a certain partner company. This is the basic pattern, and it's a limited amount of partners. So we even started there with cargo crime to a certain degree, and generally we worked with those partners in pulling also out of TAPA standards, but also from our own, the elements we thought are necessary for getting to a general level of security. For certain high-risk areas, one example was, for example, or is Romania. We use additional specific site letters which raise this security level to a certain degree. And if we have very high-risk parts, then we have to say our general network, our LTL network, is not the right way to transport them. Then we have to use specific transportation. This is basically, yeah, I would technically say a three-step process, but as these specific site letters tend to be specific, this middle step can be more or less anything. So it's a little bit a gray area, or it's unsharp because we mitigate the risks we see there.
Philip, I could see you nodding in agreement there. I was going to come to you to talk about supply chain security audits. Did you want to add anything to what Jan said first?
Yeah, I can add a little bit to it. I think it's very similar, and it probably goes back to the whole know your supply chain concept. There are certain parts of your supply chain where you will need a FSR1. There may be some parts of your supply chain that maybe products get diluted a little bit, shipments get diluted a little bit, and then perhaps that's where you bring in an in-between type of standard, your own set of freight security requirements. And then when you go into a shared network, but you still have a very high value commodity, you have to be reviewing that in a slightly different way. And I think that's, I guess most people in the room, most manufacturers, most transport providers are probably doing versions of that, tailor-making a supply chain security program to fit the complex supply chains. And that's the key part. They're complex supply chains now. And I think that's perhaps the piece.
Let me ask you about global supply chain security audits. What auditing trends are you seeing in the industry at the moment?
For those who recognize the phrase, TPRM, third-party risk management. Now, clearly everybody in TAPA understands the concept of third-party risk management because the FSRs are based on doing assessments inside non-manufacturer sites. It's your sites. But the concept of TPRM is spreading, and I've seen this across the industry, talking to different people that we work with. The depth that people are going into their carrier network, into the supplier network, into the commodity network, to understand that bigger map of their supply chain and to have a risk management program that can look at where do we assess, where is my weak link, where's the critical component that could bring down a factory, where is the most valuable shipment, well, where does that most valuable shipment stay for a period of time. So getting into those different areas and doing different elements of security assessments or security audits. And I guess it's the concept of what TAPA has been doing for many years, which is going out to the supplier base, but it's going to the supplier base plus the supplier base plus the supplier base and going down those layers. That's probably the area I see the greatest amount. And TPRM has also brought into a lot of conversation around cybersecurity, which we touched on already. A lot more trade compliance programs are becoming similar. The regulatory controls are very similar between the different programs. So then compliance with one allows you to be compliant with the majority. And those programs, those government entity trade programs, are also going down with a greater focus on cybersecurity, which made me think earlier when I was listening to some of the conversations around the skills of that. Most of the people in here in this room, you know, this room itself could be a center of excellence when it comes to supply chain security, but most of us are probably in that physical space and not in that cyberspace. And I think that's perhaps one of the greatest changes, is that skill set to be able to go in and do a site audit and know the certain amount of information you can do in a cyberspace, and then when to bring in a cyber expert or a cyber skilled individual, or how do we become cyber skilled? They're probably the biggest changes I'm seeing in the auditing part of the business.
Thank you, Philip. Let me come back to you, Torsten. How are we doing on the chat?
I must say the bar concept is working perfectly. I have tons of questions. I would like to say that some of the questions, and I'm sorry, are really not in this session, because they are referring to, FSR, TSR, what do we need to adjust. So there's a session tomorrow on this one. But there's a question which is normally to Philip, but I would like to say it's also to others. I know the answer already, okay, but I raised the question. Are you able to block stolen computers I'm also smiling, and you know why? You know my background. Okay, I can raise the same question to Sony. You know, we are a tool, as some other vendors is doing to destroy black markets.
Philip.
Kieran said, do I want to take it? I'm actually going to do it politicians. I'm going to sidestep this one. But what I would say is I suspect the questions come from somebody who has a product to sell us. If that is the case, obviously reach out. But the answer to that is no. That's not something in our space.
Kieran.
We often get questions when from time to time FTLs go missing with fraudulent pickups in France, in the Netherlands, and the retailers who actually own the product, Sony have sold them in, immediately come to us and say, the truck has been stolen, can you block them? And the answer is, yes, we can, but do we? No, we don't. And the primary reason for that is that it's not our problem in the sense that it's already sold, and the commercial, you know, it's a commercial and legal reason why they don't block them. I mean, we have police investigations and going knocking on doors, and we know where computers are inside because we can see the activation of the consoles, the stolen consoles. But I have never seen in my 8 years in PlayStation, even though we have tracked down where they have gone to, ever them being blocked. So that in itself could be a deterrent, but our legal team don't go down that road.
Torsten, can we come back to you for another question from the app?
There are tons of questions, you know, related to costs. And I would like to summarize, because as I said, there are a lot of questions. And I would like to encourage the people who raise questions, you know, in the networking session to really contact directly to our panelists. But the question is really mainly linked to, okay, how does you as a shipper address and take over the cost you put on the transport company, for example, like, you know, secured parking places and so on and so on. So that's really the question, you know.
Who would like to, Mark, do you want to start on that? Jan?
Someone has to start, yeah?
You're closest to me.
Yeah, okay. So basically, I mean, I talked about these, for example, specific site letters we use to address specific risks. And those site letters we are making public during the call for office. So basically, it's included in the basic calculations. It's a little bit more difficult when we have to implement them into a running contract. Then I would just say, without commenting any further, then we start negotiations.
Yeah, Mark.
Not to confuse anybody, so I didn't want to reply because I wanted to neglect the topic or be bad to our logistics suppliers, but I think we are in a defensive position at the moment, I think, where our logistics suppliers are telling us what kind of security features we need for certain trade lanes, and that is ultimately priced in. So we are not at that stage yet where we would be requesting special security features, but I hope we get there soon.
Thank you. Torsten, back to you.
Again, we have really a lot of questions, and some questions are linked to fake carriers. So what are you doing? What are your actual programs, you know, to really avoid fake carriers?
Kieran.
Well, as one who has experience in that, we had a fraudulent pickup during this year from an FSRA facility, so clearly a fake carrier came in. And the processes to avoid it are very clear, but they have to be followed. And in our case, in the case where it happened, it was absolutely clear. But I think Adrian had it up there, complacency. When complacency comes in, you forget the rules, you see the trucks coming in, and when volume is up, you know, you drop your guard and you don't look at the various pre-alert notifications that come in. There's 4 things that you need. You need a pre-alert 24 to 48 hours in advance of a driver, a tractor, a trailer, and the order number. And they have to be verified when they arrive there, and if there's any change, it has to be verified by the company. So there's a very good protocol to follow in which you can avoid it. But having said that, the experience is that, you know, the criminal activity, they have insider insider information. They're very clever. They even, in our case, they even had information that the warehouse didn't have. So it's really deep, sophisticated insider information. But if, in that case, if it had been checked as per the protocol, it would have been avoided. So I'm going to say there are 4 things to check, but they're the basic. But it's a very prevalent crime out there, and it doesn't happen opportunistically. It happens very systemically and very well planned.
Philip, did you want to add something?
I'll add a little bit, and it's more an associated comment that would apply in this situation and perhaps in others. It's building relationships with the business and having the security team to a level of agreement with the leadership that when they are suspicious of something that they can stop it instantly. Because nobody ever wants to stop business. Nobody ever wants to put a load on hold because it affects ultimately a customer because things work on quite tight deadlines. But it's building that relationship that leadership know that when you call them, you've done all your checks and balances. And when you make that phone call, or even if you don't make the phone call, you make the decision to stand down a load, to return a shipment, no matter how valuable, that they understand that there's a security reason behind it. And it takes time to build those relationships and to build that confidence with the leadership. But if you can do it, it can actually be successful in some occasions. That could be that one person in a warehouse identifying there's something wrong with this driver, just one small piece. Has he got the authority? Has he got the confidence to actually stand down that load? And that's a challenge in most industries.
Kieran.
Just one other point on that, because it just comes to mind. Like, in the case of Sony, we don't own any warehouses, we don't own any transport, we don't have people based in warehouses, we don't have any staff. In fact, I am the only supply chain security manager between here and Auckland. So we rely on and we collaborate on with the management of the transportation companies and the warehouses. So it's that collaboration which is absolutely key in terms of making sure that they're follow up. So the role is continuous oversight and continuous assessment and not letting the standards drop and further, as I said, to repeat myself, for there to be no complacency.
Thank you. Torsten, back to you.
Yeah, there's another question. I need to highlight that the question is coming from a Romanian, okay? How has criminal behavior changed in recent years? He should know it. And how are you able to address these vulnerabilities more quickly?
Philip, let me start with you, and then I'm sure someone else will follow.
I don't know why I volunteered to go first, but I think it ties into something I was saying. It's about the layers of security. We have available to us now a lot more physical security measures that harden the shipments and the supply chains. We have a lot more technology available to us. We have technology that will talk to technology. We have technology, years ago we talked about tracking. Then we progressed to tracking and maybe, recovery if you're lucky. Nowadays, we're in that space of prevention. It's about using technologies, knowing when something's happening, reacting to it, and having the goods technically recovered before they were lost. Or if they actually are taken, recovering them in a far quicker time frame. I think that's a big shift in how the industry's gone.
Jan, let me come to you on that, and then Mark, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, just a little advertisement for the presentation we did 3 years ago. Our solution partly was force multiplication. So we qualified our plans, our local securities to follow up in this matter of cargo crime. And we now, like we presented 3 years ago, we have on every site we have people who are familiar with these issues, and this very much speeded up reaction times, broke series, this kind of stuff.
Mark, on criminal behaviors, how they've changed and how you can address these vulnerabilities.
Yes, and I think that behavioral change is in our case more complex. So what we have seen as a real-life example out of the South American region is that we had issues with theft from our legitimate supply chain that throughout a really lengthy process with the police and law enforcement and private investigators, we were managed to clear out, right? So what we saw, what happened after that was within 6 months, entirely new village was raised up from the ground where they started counterfeiting our product. So it was just from them, we moved them out of the theft area, and they said, okay, but the market is there, we're making tons of money, so let's look what else we can do. If you can't get to the real product anymore, then we start counterfeiting it. And I think this is one special thing of our industry that really worries us. Yeah.
Thank you everybody. Torsten.
Yes, the next one is linked to OT security, operational technology. It's really, do you have thoughts on how OT security is helping your supply chain, or is it really still a new field?
Is that too new a field for anyone to respond to, or a new field? Philip.
I'm not too sure if I understand the question 100%, so if I don't, you can ping a question to Torsten and he can correct us. But I assume we're talking about operational technology. If that's the case, my understanding of that would be, what do we do nowadays in, it's a little bit of an extension of what I was saying a few moments ago about tracking technologies. It's not just about tracking anymore. We use a lot of what we have in our industry for supply chain visibility, supply chain resiliency, topics that are not really connected to security, but they provide a huge return on investment for what we put in from a security perspective. And we have other divisions within the business who want to use technologies, and you can then partner technologies together, greater return on investment, more and more parties actually get the benefits of the technology and connected technology. So I'm not too sure if that's where your question was going. If it wasn't, well, there's a useless piece of information for you.
But just on that, if that was indeed the question, just a practical example is that when there was congestion at the ports in Rotterdam, I think it was 22 or 23, there were scores and scores of containers, PlayStation containers coming from China, and there was huge build-up in Rotterdam. And we ended up having huge demurrage costs. But because we had trackers inside the containers that were a security feature, we weren't using it as a logistics feature. And so what has happened within PlayStation over the last year and a half is that what was used for tracking from a security perspective is more and more being used for visibility and the logistics team. So that's just to enhance what Philip was saying.
Let me just ask a few questions and ask you to look into your crystal balls a bit more. Philip, perhaps I can come to you. How do you think the criminal landscape is going to be evolving in the coming years?
So I suppose the big topic is, of course, we have to mention cyber. I think the cyber risks, I don't think it's a crystal ball to say that cyber risks will grow and probably become more sophisticated. I think if I ask my kids that, they tell me that as well. Everybody knows the challenges out there with cyber. Everybody, I guess, is starting to get a line of sight as to potential risks that AI may bring in the future. It's going to bring a lot of value, we know that, but will AI bring some complexity when it comes to assisting in cybersecurity risk, threats or attacks against our business? Who knows? So I think that cyberspace is going to be probably something we'll continue to talk about at these meetings year after year. I think deception crimes, I always go back to some of the basics. I mentioned, I think it was London many years ago, and we were all talking about deception crimes taking place. I had some folks that I know in the industry I was chatting to only about 2 weeks ago, and they're talking about deception crimes taking place in America. And I'm like, hang on, lads. How come you're still falling victim to deception crimes? And I think we will continue to do that. So I think the old ways will continue. We get deceived because the information is, leaked. We get deceived because people, good social engineering. And the more people become better at that, I think we'll still continue to see that as a crime. It may shift a little bit, but I think it'll still be a crime. The other one, I think, and it's only for certain products, and when I was listening to the one about the expensive metals, diversion risks. This is something we're seeing that's completely new for this time or era we're in. There's issues to do with commodities, access to certain products. Some products are forbidden in certain jurisdictions, and diversion. And people have a need to get those products. And in a conversation I had with somebody, they're seeing in the Americas where organized cartels are getting involved and supporting foreign adversaries to gain access to product. That's probably something we're going to see more and more of, depending on what we see that's happening in the world around commodities, tariffs, products being restricted. If they're restricted and somebody has a need for it, well, then there's potentially going to be a diversion somewhere. And that'll probably challenge us.
Kieran, let me ask you to add to that, and then Mark, I'll come to you with a similar question, and then back to you, Torsten, afterwards.
So just on that, in terms of deception, what we're seeing in PlayStation, and I talked about FTL, and we have full-on tracking, turn-by-turn tracking, but when it comes to last mile, including at the pallet level, what we have begun to see is that there's surreptitious theft from the middle of a pallet, which is disguised, and this is a real last mile problem that we're trying to focus on. It's disguised, it's received by the consignee, they sign the POD, it's stored in the warehouse, and 3 weeks later, when they unbundle it, they say, oh, we're short 2 PlayStations from inside the middle of a... And that's opportunistic, I think, but that's somebody knowing the system that it won't be discovered for 2 or 3 weeks if it's an Amazon warehouse or a big Carrefour type warehouse, and they're taking the opportunity when it's in a hub, not under camera, to take that opportunity. And that sort of, is that deception? That sort of, it's a form of surreptitious crime which we're finding very difficult to beat, but that's because they're only taking onesies and twosies.
Jan, are you seeing something similar?
Yeah, it's the thing we categorized as hidden theft, and it was our classic over many years.
Mark, let me come to you before I go back to Torsten, to the app. What are your key concerns looking into the years to come, and what changes are you expecting in the supply chain security field?
So again, for me, it's switching on the news channel, right? This is the worst thing I can do, because in the pharmaceutical area, what we see, and Torsten mentioned the diverse group of members that HAPA has, and I think wherever country you come from, you have all the same experience. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, right? But the medical needs stay the same. So for us, for example, now, to be more precise, 2 of our blockbusters are diabetic products, COPD, lung diseases, and everybody needs them, right? And majority of the people, or many of the people, are not being able to pay the normal prices again. So not even saying this morning, the plans to put the tariff also on the pharmaceutical imports into the US, people are not able to afford it anymore, but they needed to survive. So what do they turn to? Illicit online pharmacies or every other criminal that either counterfeits it or steals it and sells it for a cheaper price. And this is not going to go away, it's only going to get worse.
Torsten, we've just got a few minutes left. Have you got one more question from the chat?
Yeah, I must say I love one question, okay? If you could each have one wish to Tapa, what would it be? And please don't say one night with Torsten.
Let me start with you, Mark. And I was also going to ask you about maybe TAPA standards, if there's anything currently missing there. So maybe that might be one of them, but perhaps you have a different wish.
I think I mentioned that before. I think my biggest wish would be really to grow the TAPA family and bring our supply chain colleagues on board. Because it's a fact, right? I'm now in my 7th year for Boehringer Ingelheim. I know all of the security managers of our key service providers, and it's no offense, but nobody contacted me, right? So our quarterly business reviews, they are done by our supply chain colleagues. And as I mentioned before, due to various reasons, they are busy with other things, right? They just need to deliver the things as fast as possible to all of our patients. So I really think connecting the dots, we need to extend the group here, and we need to bring our supply chain colleagues in.
Jan, anything you'd like to
Yeah,
express a wish
technically I can't wish for myself, because as I'm a member of the TSR committee, I could just enter my wishes, but maybe to pull one point that one guy who's here with me, he wants, maybe I can introduce this, and he has the wish for the FSR standard to be able to do it like it two-step certification, with the first step covering as a major the basic building and construction elements, and the second step the operational and management steps. So he has an easier time to give, for example, a partner a certain preview that he will be safe in the future if he adheres to this and this element, and also has the option to raise it to a higher level at the FSR.
Philip, do you have a response? Then we'll come to Kieran.
Yeah, actually, it was something, I was thinking of it earlier when Torsten was talking, and there was a lot of numbers put up about members and people and companies. And we hear in certain industries about centers of excellence. And it made me realize as I came here this morning and I was saying hello to people, some people that we've obviously known for 20 odd years. But when you think of the companies they work for, you think of the experience they have, then you meet colleagues who travel over from America to join the EMEA events. There's probably people here from other parts of EMEA. How do we tap into that knowledge? Now, I know you can send an email and say, hey, any chance, Thornton, linking me with XYZ, and I've done that a few times myself. But how do we tap into the value of all of that brain power, all of those years of experience, particularly for maybe some of the newer members who want to reach out to someone who knows? And there's probably a way of doing it. There's probably an app of, create an app and it will do it. But let's use that. Let's use that and create a center of excellence for members to use for different aspects of supply chain security.
Kieran.
So I agree with what Mark said in terms of getting the supply chain logistics people in. The only time I ever hear TAPA mentioned within Sony PlayStation is when we lose something, and then they ask, they mention TAPA. So even the logistics people that I deal with, and in fact, Michael Anner used to be a great advocate for PlayStation or for TAPA. He has since left PlayStation, but the director for logistics for PlayStation isn't here. The transportation people here aren't here, and we don't have any warehouse people, but certainly the transportation people. And I just think that they just didn't prioritize it. So even for a company who is absolutely, our management are really focused on security and spend money on security in warehouses, and we only use TAPA TSR1 carriers, but the people within the logistics and supply chain, they don't really, I'm championing TAPA within PlayStation, and I just worry that if they don't hear it from me, they don't realize how important it is in terms of how it is, how we collaborate with the partners who are within TAPA. So I just think, I don't know how we get the message bled over onto the logistics team besides just security. I mean, everybody here has security in their DNA, and it's just a question of how do we actually get that message across further.
Well, I think that's a really good place to end this panel. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for all of the insights that you've all brought today, and also, of course, Torsten for monitoring and moderating on the app.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking them all.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you. Good to see you, Philip. Thank you, Kieran.